welcome to As If Contemporary Art Podcast with me, Lisa Fevral. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things, obviously. One of them being a topic that a lot of you asked me about in the past year or so, which is camp and the aesthetic of camp and what camp actually is. I think that it's one of those topics where it's really easy to misinterpret it because it's just so overused in pop culture. It's kind of like the same thing as the male gaze. Oftentimes I get comments on like my content where people just throw that term around and they don't use it correctly, and then I have to be like, girl, that's not the correct terminology, you're not using it correctly. But I kind of feel like a dick for doing that as well. But in any case, we are going to talk about Susan Sontag and her Notes on Camp essay. It was released in 1964, so it's been a hot minute since it came out. So it's a very interesting essay. It's written in an easy to understand type of way. It's not too over the top with the terminology. We're actually gonna start with just a little bit of a catch up. If you want to skip to the camp part, you can always do that. There's gonna be a stamp probably, if I don't forget to do that. But a few things that I just want to chat to you about. First of all, once again, I took almost 20 days to release a new podcast episode. I'm sorry. The reason being me getting a little bit busy with the main channel and with other projects, and again having to go to a bunch of doctor appointments. So don't worry, it's nothing too bad. Obviously I have a bit of a different scale of what is considered to be too bad, but it's nothing that you would have to be too worried about. I just need to go do a CT scan again. I just did a blood test, and I need to do a scan because I have chest pains and they are worried that it might be blood clots. I swear to God, this is just so fucking ridiculous. As soon as I'm starting to kind of get a grasp on my life and I'm kind of taking care of everything more or less, I start to get some problems that I have to take care of again. And it doesn't even, there's no breathing room for me at all. I don't go out or enjoy myself at all. I do is feel tired because I'm still in recovery. I don't know how long it's going to take to get back to normal after chemo. I genuinely don't know. I have heard from multiple doctors that it usually takes 2 months per each month you were in treatment. So for me, it was 4 months in treatment, 4 months. Was it 4 months? Yes. 4 months of chemo, right? So it's gonna take me at least 8 months to get back to my usual levels of energy. And that means that I'm not going to be back to my normal energy until at least December/January. That's at the best, if everything goes right. But I have started to get chest pains again. Not even again, I guess. I didn't really know that I had tumors before. But I started to get some chest pains, and I was kind of that's normal, because some doctors say that if you had tumors in some kind of area and after chemo, after cancer is dead, it can still hurt sometimes because there's still some tissue, there's some scar tissue, other crap, whatever. So I kind of was maybe it's that. My doctor thinks that it's just the nerves in between my ribs that are kind of inflamed or something. And it's nothing, it's not a big deal, it's gonna go away or whatever. But they just want to be safe because, in my case with the regimen of chemo that I was on, it has an effect on your heart and on your lungs. And you have a higher chance of getting blood clots and other crap because, of course, if you get to live after having cancer, you get a bunch of side effects, and I'm kind of quite lucky in terms of what kind of side effects I'm having or which ones I'm supposed to be having in the future, because some people have to restructure their entire life. I had to do that too, but not to a degree that other people have to do it, in any case, what I'm trying to say is I'm having so much fun again. It's basically this whole thing, not a big deal, but it's annoying in combination with still being tired from chemo, and in combination with having to go get my wisdom teeth out, okay? So I have these two. One of them started to hurt, and it's all because of chemo again. Because before, all of my wisdom teeth were totally fine. They were all out, they all grew out, and they were all fitting in my mouth. They weren't, like, nothing was wrong about them. Now, after chemo, apparently chemo really affects your mouth and, like, the pH balance and stuff like that while you're in treatment. So a lot of things go kind of wrong during that period of time. So now I have to go and do a surgery next week. And because even though the wisdom teeth are not inside, so I could have just done it in the regular dentist office, I can't do it because I was on chemo and I had a blood cancer, so I cannot just do surgeries, even if mild surgeries, just willy-nilly. I have to be going to a surgeon, which is fantastic. And it's not like it costs an arm and a leg or anything. And I don't have insurance, because of course I don't. I'm like, I guess, self-employed, and I'm just starting to like make a little bit of a decent income that could at least cover my living cost with YouTube and everything. Of course, immediately as soon as I'm like, okay, so I can pay my rent and my food, now I have to like think about paying off my student loans. I can actually start doing that immediately. I got a bunch of different bills that I have to take care of. I have to also go to the vet with my dog. Obviously, I do that all the time, like whenever she needs like checkups and whatever. But she has something on her paw, on her on her leg, like the front legs or paws. I don't know. Basically, she has like some kind of thing. And of course, people say that those growths can be malignant. And especially after having cancer, of course, I am in a frenzy immediately. I'm like, okay, well, now I have to go and do a full thing, get them to do a biopsy and whatever. I'm just gonna hope that she's totally fine, because I can deal with myself not feeling well, but I cannot deal with my dog not feeling well. It just makes me so anxious that I want to throw up, honestly. But in any case, this is kind of the situation that I'm in right now. I started to get some sponsors, as you've seen on my main channel, if you have. And the two sponsors that I've worked with was like, one is this gold jewelry company, and another one, this backpack company. And I get offers all the time in my email, okay? This is how it kind of works for YouTubers. You get a bunch of people offering you shit. Sometimes you get like an agent who can, or a manager who can set sponsorships up and whatever. But I'm gonna tell you right away, I have a really hard time just taking deals, even if the company is like proper company, it's legit company, everything is good about them. But if they don't make sense for my channel, if they don't make sense in terms of like, if I don't feel like talking about them, like if it doesn't make sense for me to be talking about them, I just can't take the deal. And I really want to get more proper deals so I can actually have like a steady income, so I could do the surgeries without, going into debt. But obviously, it just doesn't, like, good deals don't come by that often. There's a lot of companies that are like big companies who also try to take advantage of YouTubers all the time. And it's like, listen, this is not a charity. You know what I mean? Like, I put a lot of work into what I'm doing. So if you want to be in any way mentioned, in any way talked about on my channel, you have to be a decent company on your own. You have to be a company that I would want to talk about. You're not like some company that fucks people over. Do you know what I mean? Like, and also it's kind of the same thing in terms of them treating me well, right? Like, why would I be in business with someone who doesn't respect me enough to assume that I know the rates, that I know the standard of how this works, And anyway, if you have any suggestions as to what kind of businesses or promotions you think would make sense with me, with my channel and stuff like that, let me know, because I'm interested in your input. If you think that there's anything that I should look into or whatever, because I want to be working with people I like. I don't want to be working with you know what I mean, like, if I could, I would just not promote anybody, but if I have to, I'd rather promote somebody decent, right? And I just also like just hate when on channels there's like ads that are so far off from what the channel is about. But I understand that there's not a lot of businesses that just like offer deals to content creators that are like good deals. Let's quickly talk about some music because there's been a lot of music that came out.
What? Are they insane? How are we supposed to survive without any tunes?
First of all, my favorite artist, I've talked about her in the first episode of this podcast, and I talk about her every time she has a comeback because, well, I just like her a lot, you know, as like a person in terms of her public image. Obviously, I don't know her in real life, so I can't be like, I like her as a person. But in terms of her public image about the information that's out there about her, I really like her. So it's Sunmi, and Sunmi had a comeback recently with a song called Heartburn. As far as I understand, Heartburn is like just the English version, and it's not supposed to be like, you know, like the heartburn, but more like the heat is rising or the fever is rising or whatever it is. So like that's kind of the name of her project. And listen, when I tell you it's top tier visuals, top tier concept, I mean it. Oh my god. I will leave a link in the description. Please go watch it if you like anything in terms of aesthetic that relates to what I like. If you've watched me for a while, I don't know if this is the first time you've watching something from me, or if you only listen to the podcast or something. I assume that most of you kind of come from my main channel, and that's how you find out about this podcast. But goddamn, that whole release, like the music video, the dance, the choreography. Oh, the choreography is so good. Everything is top tier. Her hair, I was waiting for her to have long hair since Gashina. I'm not gonna lie. Since then, I was like, every comeback, I was like, Sunmi, please, I'm begging you to come back with extensions. Of course, there's a lot of people who complain about extensions all the time. They're like, why isn't it blended well? And like, I mean, it's a fair question. I think that it still looks so good that I don't care. I can see that it's not blended as well as it could be. I can see that obviously, it could look better. It could. But she just looks gorgeous in that color. She looks like Bloom, and we know I'm a Winx bitch. Do I even have to mention it at this point? You know, I feel like out of all media, Winx is the one thing that I will always be talking about. However many years is gonna pass, I'm still gonna be talking about it because it's one of the things that made me interested in fashion, in art, in all of those things, you know. When I tell you that this release is amazing, I mean it. The dresses, I don't know if you were familiar with Fancy Club, that brand from Vietnam. They are fantastic. They do such beautiful dresses. They're expensive. I want at least one, that orange one that they released recently. I want it so bad, but it's so expensive. Maybe one day, maybe I'll like, at some point, I'll have, you know, a bit of money on the side that I could spend on this one dress that I really want. But she wore dresses that were either similar to it or the actual dresses. I think that in the photo shoot for Heartburn, she wore that white Fancy Club dress that's so beautiful. It's just so magical, just something fairy-like about it. And the whole concept of her new video is that she is some kind of immortal being. It's not specified what kind, but she's kind of like a siren, a vampire. In any case, some kind of immortal being that is kind of ambiguous in terms of her morals and in terms of how she feels about the situations that she's in. And the situations that in that music video, spoilers, if you don't want me spoiling it, go watch it right now and then come back. It's just gonna take you 3 minutes. But now I'm gonna continue. She basically falls in love with these different men in different time periods, and they all catch a fever. And then they all die from that really, really, really high fever. So it's kind of like, I guess it's a metaphor for, falling in love too hard or something like that. I don't know. But in any case, it's really interesting to see that she's kind of really sad about it. She's not trying to do it on purpose, it seems like. But then it's kind of ambiguous because in one of the scenes, she's literally dancing in the cemetery with two ghosts of men who died, holding that little string, like the rope that you hop over when I don't know what it's called in English, but we've all done it when we were kids, like jumping over the rope or whatever in different types of sequences that kind of make up a specific pattern that's a challenge, like we had different names for different types of, dances on the rope or whatever, or over the rope, that kind of thing. And it's actually part of her choreography on stage too, which is, I don't know, man, I just love her. She has this massive fans, just genuinely, absolutely gigantic on stage, and they're part of the dance and everything. She's just so charismatic. She's my favorite, I'm telling you. She's like number one artist for me personally. I just really like everything about her and about her work. It is beautiful. Go check it out, especially if you like bass driven songs. I think that Heartburn and this side, like the B track on the project called Childhood, they're both very much bass driven, so I think you're gonna enjoy it if you like bass songs. Yeah, and she's coming to Vancouver on her tour in September. So I'm like really excited. I want to get tickets. Hopefully they're still gonna be available after I deal with the surgery, so I don't I can't be buying anything right now until I'm done with the surgeries. Also, Vespa came back, obviously. I'm gonna assume that this is a safe place to talk about a K-pop group, without thinking that someone's gonna jump on my throat. I love Vespa, and that's why I'm talking about them. But I want to say that I've heard a lot of criticism before about their stage presence, okay? Like their charisma on stage and everything. And I was kind of like, I can see it, but with Savage, I did not feel like... Bad name, by the way, bad name for a song. But with foreigners, sometimes I'm like, people here don't know that this is not a great word to use. What am I expecting from foreigners, And also, I guess it's not for me to decide. I wish it was a different name, but in any case, they definitely felt like in that performance it was a little bit more robotic, especially the choreography in the chorus. So I was like, you know what? It's fine. It works. So I thought that maybe their performance, their attitude, their facial expressions, everything about the way that they were delivering the song was about being slightly robotic. So I was okay with it, Now with the girls, first of all, the choreography, people need to stop making choreography for cameras, okay? I haven't seen them perform it from afar yet, because I know that there's going to be a lot of people filming them from afar without cutting in and out and whatever, without the fancy camera work. I haven't seen them do that from afar yet, but I can already tell that this whatever the hell they're doing, this whole move, it's gonna look bad. It's gonna look bad on stage. It's going to look funny. It's only gonna look good on camera. And I just need choreographers all over the world to stop making choreography for cameras, because or do two choreographies. Do one for video and then one for stage or something. Adjust it. Make adjustments, because it doesn't look good anyway. In any case, did I pre-order the album before it came out a while ago? Yes. Did I get two versions? Because I wanted the metaverse version or whatever, and the Rocket Puncher version, because Karina is my favorite. Yeah. Yes, I did that, okay? But Am I a little bit underwhelmed by the entirety of the project? Yes. Because Life's Too Short, there's two versions of it, and it's like one of them is in Korean, one of them is in English. To be honest, I do not care that much for either one of them. It's not a bad song, to be exact, as much as it's a bit flavorless. It's a little bit too Ed Sheeran-esque, and nobody wants that. Like, let Ed Sheeran do his thing and let aespa do aespa, please. And I just need them to speak about their experiences within the story more. I feel like a lot of their songs that are about the story that they're telling is kind of like a word salad. Do you actually understand from the lyrics, without putting too much effort in terms of connecting the dots that are way too far apart? Do you understand what's going on in those songs? Because like, I understand that they have those videos that kind of explain what the hell is happening, and like, that's cool and all, but I think that the words in a song, the way that things are structured, it still needs to make more sense than it does. Maybe it's the translations, but I don't think the issue is the translations, because I'm all for their own terminology, their old Kwangyanese, like their whole Kwangyanese language. I'm all for it. The problem is the language that's in between those terms. It doesn't quite hit. It doesn't quite make sense. However, I do like Girls, the song. I do like Illusion, but when Illusion came out, I was like, okay, it's a B-side track. I'm assuming that this is going to be one of those that's kind of like not at the very bottom, but not at the top for me. And then the rest of the album came out. And it just, I See You and what was the other one? Lingo? I mean, I don't mind Lingo, I guess. But all of them are just like, they lack that oomph, you know, that aespa needs to have. In any case, I'm still excited for the albums, and I'm still an aespa girl, so like there's nothing I can do. Of course I'm gonna be participating in the whole thing. And there's also this group that I listen to, Muna, or M-U-N-A, I don't know how to pronounce it, if it's Muna, M-U-N-A. They have a new album out, and I really like their song No Idea. Last year their song Number One Fan was my number one. And this year they have No Idea, and I really like the song. Yeah, that's about it for music. Anyway, let's talk about camp.
Yeah, she's a full-on Monet. It's like the painting, see? From far away, it's okay, but up close, it's a big old mess.
I refreshed my memory on this essay, Notes on Camp, and I, highlighted some things that we should talk about. And I think that the most important thing to talk about when we talk about camp is obviously the fact that it's so hard to pin down. This is the type of thing, the type of aesthetic, or the type of being, the type of performing that is so ephemeral. It's so up in the air all the time that describing it is never the same as talking about aesthetics that just have a list of things that are visually signaling that it's that aesthetic. Like, for example, for impressionist works, the brushwork is very specific, the colors that were very popular at the time, and the subject matter is usually all within the same realm. With camp, on the other hand, you kind of get this really, really wide field of things, and camp has this very specific way of being. It kind of exists in the past more than it does in the present or future, because this aesthetic revolves around this very specific sincerity and unawareness that only could be appreciated and acknowledged as camp post its existence. Let me kind of go through the essay, and then at the very end I'm gonna give you a few examples of different works that are and aren't camp, but kind of considered to be camp in popular culture. Camp is not quite an idea. She calls it a sensibility. instead of an idea or an aesthetic. She says, quote, "Indeed, the essence of camp is its love of the unnatural, of artifice and exaggeration." And I think that this specific quote is something that people mostly take from the essay and run with when they talk about camp. They think that any vulgarity, any over-the-top performance, or any over-the-top outfit would be camp, and it's not the case. This is just one of the components of what camp is, how it could be described, and it's not necessarily over the top or artificial in its visual sense as much as it can be in terms of what is being said or what kind of characteristics a person has. Another thing that this is not something that Susan talks about, but I personally think that it's kind of interesting to talk about, is the fact that camp is kind of in a way similar to Dada movement in terms of defying being pinned down or defying commodification in many ways. Obviously, some versions of camp are commodified in some way, but it's interesting that talking about camp, this is what Sontag says in her essay, to talk about camp is therefore to betray it. Before she gets into the main bulk of the essay, that she equally loves and hates camp, and that's why she could talk about it, because anyone who actually is wholeheartedly in that sensibility cannot analyze it. And it's mostly because the nature of camp is that unawareness. If you are way too aware about what you're doing and the fact that it is over the top and it's so bad that it's good or whatever, you kind of lose that sensibility. You are not as interesting within that camp realm, or maybe not as true to a camp as you could be or should be. If you watch a movie and, for example, The Room, right? You watch it and they took it all seriously and they weren't trying to be ridiculous. They were trying to make a movie that they thought was good. And that's why watching it can be so funny, but it also can be something that you would want to rewatch multiple times because it has that quality of sincerity that makes it more interesting in a way of it failing. You know, there's like some kind of beauty to that failure. Is there something really entertaining about failure, you know? And it's not entertaining in terms of just laughing at a thing as much as you can start to like that thing because it's ridiculous. In any case, the way that Sontag talks about camp is just a bunch of like bullet points, basically, because it's hard to talk about in terms of actually having one thesis, one statement that describes it. And it kind of very contradictory, and it could be easily debated. At the same time, it still has that quality that if you get it, you can definitely spot whether something is camp or not. She does talk about the fact that it is kind of an aesthetic, kind of. What she calls it is aestheticism. Instead of seeing it as an aesthetic in the way that we're used to seeing aesthetics, especially in our digital world with TikTok, popularization of different types of aesthetics that people are putting on themselves, you know, aesthetization of existence, and not specifically it having beauty or being ugly as much as it's looking at it and assessing it in terms of it being artificial in some way, that, you know, like you kind of break down existence into different types of being, of existing as one solid thing, which is very unnatural to our existence. We don't really have very stereotypical behavior. Like, that's why stereotypes are harmful, because we as beings, we don't really fit into those terms. But camp likes to play with those stereotypes. It likes to see things as performance, as artifice, as a mask, as a type of thing that you kind of put on, you know, and not necessarily acknowledge that relationship as much as it's just kind of aware of aesthetics being performance. You probably heard people saying, oh, this is so campy, or this like decor is very campy, whatever. Anything could be camp. movies, clothes, songs, books, and even people can be camp. It's not about the person themselves and their complexity and their reality as much as it's about the reading of them, right? So you can make someone's behavior seem campy in your eyes if you're just looking at things with this type of perspective. However, Sontag also says that not everything can be camp. You can't just make something camp because you said that it is. Some things are just not it. And that's why I see like this whole conversation is so strange because it's so hard to pin it down. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, she gives a list of examples of items that are part of the canon of camp. Most of these examples I'm just honestly too young to understand. I genuinely don't, like, even if I were 20 years older than I am now, I think I would still be too young to understand these examples. But one of them I thought was really interesting and really kind of like made something click in my mind in terms of understanding what could be camp, which is stag movies seen without lust. Which stag movies, I did not know what that is. Maybe you do, but I had to look it up. And it's basically short pornographic movies that were made in 20s, 30s, 40s, basically early form of porn, but it was brief, very short, usually black and white, obviously, and it didn't have sound. I thought it was really interesting that seeing those, or, watching those movies without any lust is campy, or like it's camp. And I thought that's so interesting because I oftentimes, when I engage in media that's supposed to be hot in some capacity, I oftentimes don't get it because I am very much on the grayscale. I'm way over there. And I'm like, I just oftentimes find it really silly whenever I watch something that's supposed to be hot. It's kind of like if you watch something extremely explicit, but you just kind of analyze what it is, what it actually is, and how it looks without that lens of lust. It's really funny and it's really absurd in a very weird way, which I think is interesting that it will be considered camp. I thought it would be more in the realm of absurdity, but I guess that camp kind of includes some absurdity in it, like there is some absurdity to looking at the world, at objects that are, for example, very stagnant, they don't really have a lot of change to them, and see them as a stereotype and as something exaggerated or funny. Anyway, I really find this interesting. It's really interesting sensibility. Sontag also says that camp does have a little bit of a leaning towards some forms of art rather than others. Clothes, furniture, all the elements of visual decor, for instance, make up a large part of camp. For camp, art is often decorative art, emphasizing texture, sensuous surface, and style at the expense of content. Concert music is rarely camp. It offers no opportunity save for a contrast between silly or extravagant content and rich form. Sometimes whole art forms become saturated with camp, which is really interesting. For example, classical ballet is considered to be camp, at least to some degree, which I don't know how I feel about that, because the next thing that's in there is opera, and I would assume operettas, movies are kind of like oftentimes are camp. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them are. If camp would have favorites, it would have ballet, opera, and movies as favorites. I would say that operettas would probably... Actually, no, opera is also funky. If you really... like, that's why, for example, I don't like musicals, is because to me, unless they're camp, unless they end up being camp in retrospect, I don't see value in them at all. I really feel disconnected from the experience. People just start bursting into songs. It's fucking weird. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't work in my head. And I think that this kind of contrast of, like, for example, very serious situations and people just starting to sing out of nowhere, and the fact that everyone on stage or in the movie are all fine with that behavior and seen as weird. It's just something that it's not really explicitly a thing that's going on in their heads. It's still a thing that's happening. They talk to each other, but they're singing. It's, this dichotomy is something that's very campy. If you're familiar with anyone explaining camp and whatever, there's this form of somewhat of a misconception when it comes to people thinking and saying that camp needs to be bad art to become camp, that it's necessary for it to fail at what it attempted. I think that a large part of camp is failure, and sincere failure, but at the same time it still does not mean that the end result, the actual product, is bad art. Not always. Sometimes it's actually the best type of art. It's campy, but it has a lot of merit because it was actually done with a lot of sincerity, and it has a lot of usually committed, passionate performances. Another point in the essay is camp sees everything in quotation marks. It is not a lamp, but a lamp. Not a woman, but a woman. To perceive camp in objects and persons is to understand being as playing a role, as I've said previously. At the same time, I don't think that it is a parody. It's important to remember that camp is sincere, and parody isn't. Parody implies mockery in some extent. It implies comedy that's derived from assuming that being. In camp, it's not specified. You don't have to be funny, but performing something, One of the important things is to distinguish what Sontag calls naive and deliberate camp. Pure camp is always naive. Camp which knows itself to be camp is usually less satisfying. That's why I've talked about the Room, the movie, as an example of that, because I personally think that it's campy, and it's campy because of its naivete, because it doesn't understand that it's being a bad movie. It thinks, not the movie, I guess, but the people who created it, they were genuinely making this movie, and even though it is ridiculous, it still has that genuine input in it. And when some people try to perform camp, it's just not the same, right? When you watch a movie that was made with an intention of being camp, it oftentimes doesn't feel like camp. It feels like a parody of camp. The pure examples of camp are unintentional. They are dead serious. This is literally the quote from the essay, and I think it perfectly summarizes one of the points of camp that makes it really easy for you to understand whether something is camp or isn't. That's why, for example, for the Met Gala that was camp themed, I think that most people should have referenced things from the past with their, their garments and stuff that were camp, rather than try and create camp on the red carpet, which not a lot of people tried, because of course nobody tries from the Met Gala. But if we're going to assume that if we're going to just pay attention to those that tried, many of them tried to make a camp moment, but a camp moment created to be a camp moment is not pure camp. Do you understand? I think that the most faithful but also the most accurate representation of camp on that red carpet would have been dressing up as something that is already considered to be part of the canon of camp, not because it's faithful to being camp, but because you know that you can't purposefully and forcefully create camp. It's a thing that happens naturally. It's a thing that just occurs in the wild, Another really, really good way to kind of tell whether something is camp or not is whether the creator or the person who is camping, if they have contempt for the subject matter of what they are performing. If, for example, in The Room, someone was not committing and they thought that this movie was really bad, it would not be camp as much as it is camp when everyone is on the same page thinking that this is the best movie they've ever made. Usually people who perform camping, they don't know that they are camping. That's why I'm also telling you always that camp is usually placed in the past, because it's only in retrospect that we can see something good about a bad performance, or we could see something extremely performative in a very genuine way when it's not performed anymore, when you look at it in retrospect. This is point 23 in the essay. I think it's really interesting. In naive or pure camp, the essential element is seriousness, a seriousness that fails. Of course, not all seriousness that fails can be redeemed as camp, only that which has the proper mixture of the exaggerated, the fantastic, the passionate, and the naive. When something is just bad rather than camp, it's often because it is too mediocre in its ambition. The artist didn't really attempt to do something really ambitious, really outlandish. The hallmark of camp is the spirit of extravagance. It is the spirit of extravagance, but it is usually failed extravagance or exaggerated to an insane degree. Camp is art that proposes itself seriously, but cannot be taken altogether seriously because it's too much. It's kind of like watching someone's performance on stage, but just go way too into it. You know, like Lea Michele, sometimes when I see her perform, yeah, she sings really well, and technically her emotions are performed, they're there, but she's so over the top, and the way that she uses her mouth is so over the top, and she does not see it as something that she's doing purposefully most of the time, at least in her, like, not in her comedic roles, that she kind of is really camp. Do you know what I mean? Do you sense that campiness from Lea Michele? Because I do. If something is extravagant in an inconsistent or an unpassionate way, is not camp. Without passion, one gets pseudo-camp, what is merely decorative, safe, and in a word, chic. It's usually not about being extraordinary in terms of just effort. It's about, or mostly it's not about effort per se, it's about the over-the-top glamorousness, this pursuit of being special in aesthetic way. Whenever something becomes too impressive to the point where you cannot deny its merit in terms of its effort, it stops being camp. You know, it needs to just miss the mark at least a little bit, just a little bit. Still have a lot of effort put in, or a lot of passion at least put in, very naive passion, but it needs to just slightly miss the mark. Some camp is about character, about just glorification of a very specific image of a person. You can see that a lot with a lot of gay stan culture. They usually choose celebrities that have a very specific public image. For example, Cher, right? She has a very specific way of writing her tweets, for example. Just, you see a tweet from her and you're like, yeah, that's Cher, you know? And the way that she's being herself, without change, without adjustments to her character, in a very specific, exaggerated way, is what makes her such a good candidate for being part of camp. She might not realize it. She might realize it. It doesn't really matter, really. But her public image is just perfect for this camping aspect. Usually, when people have that character, it's usually a very intense type of character. A very specific type of behavior. With most art, we value its seriousness. We value what it does, what it set to achieve, and what it does achieve. And that's how we usually decide whether art is good or bad. We know what the person was going for, and we decide whether they've reached that goal or not. But with camp, the sensibility of camp does not rest on seriousness alone. It actually doesn't use seriousness as the scale of whether something is good or bad. I wouldn't say that it uses silliness as the indicator of whether something is good or bad, but it basically just doesn't use seriousness as that indicator. That's it. It doesn't use the opposite. It just doesn't use that thing that we usually use to decide whether art is actually a good or a bad piece of art. And oftentimes people think that the opposite of seriousness would be comedy, right? But comedy is just a subgenre of seriousness. It's still a very specific type of genre. It's a very specific type of art. It still has a serious set of descriptions that you have to hit. With camp, it's just not the case. One of the reasons why camp is retrospective is because you kind of have to wait for the project to be over for you to be able to decide whether something about the human experience, something new, has been revealed, because that's what camp is when it's at its best. It's technically not bad or good. Maybe it was trying to achieve one thing, but it ended up in a different place. And that different place might be an important puzzle piece for human experience. That's why a lot of people value camp as an art form. They don't say, oh, this is campy in a bad way. Do you know what I mean? Like no one who actually likes art and talks about camp or whatever goes, oh, this is camp. You go, oh, this is so campy, you know, like you enjoy it. And this is what camp strives to be. It's just as legit as a serious form of art. It just doesn't value seriousness as the thing that determines whether something is good or bad. It's more about that new experience, that new ephemeral thing, that experience of aesthetic, of a performance that is very unique and new. And it could be passionate, it could be a failed experiment, it could be a personality of someone who does not change, at least in the public eye, at all, and has a very intense type of personality with a very set, ridiculous set of things that they do. It oftentimes doesn't have a reason for being enjoyable. It doesn't have that much of a reason for being so entertaining. Obviously, Oscar Wilde is brought up a lot in this essay. His quote, "In matters of great importance, the vital element is not sincerity, but style," which is very camp. Like very camp sensibility. Just as camp is kind of not using seriousness as this way of measuring whether something is good or bad, it kind of creates a more complex relationship with the definition of seriousness, right? Because some performances that are camp, technically they're being serious, right? But in the retrospect, it becomes silly. So it has a very weird relationship with what seriousness is. Another way of actually differentiating between irony, satire, parody, and camp is the fact that irony, satire, parody, they're all serious. They might be comedy and the jokes might be silly, but they take themselves seriously in terms of being comedic, about commenting on something from some kind of perspective, deprecating one or one that's just fascinated with something. It still has seriousness, even though it's usually presented in our culture as this is just jokes, it's not serious, whatever it is, right? Which it is jokes, but jokes they still have seriousness in the sense that I'm talking about, you know? The way that you decide whether, for example, comedy is good or bad, there is a serious set of things that determine that, right? Whenever they are outside of the realm of camp. This point I think is really interesting too, in describing the difference between tragedy, comedy, and camp, and why camp is not in the comedy section, or even in tragedy section. Usually people associate it with comedy, but why it isn't. Part of it is the fact that the comedy that camp does have, it's not satirical, it's not a commentary. A commentary YouTube video that involves parody sketches or commentary on other channels or whatever, you know, if someone just performs a behavior or of a celebrity or something, it's not camp. Because camp comedic sense is not bitter, and the way that Sontag describes these things is tragedy is an experience of hyper involvement, comedy is an experience of under involvement or detachment. Sontag talks about dandyism, which is a dandy is a man who was really into appearances, fashion, that kind of stuff, and all about appearances basically. Very much having hobbies that look good, like, you know, like nowadays playing tennis or something, you know, dressing in a specific way and whatever, to have that kind of air of not trying but being refined, you know. So she kind of compares dandy performance, right? She says the dandy held a perfumed handkerchief to his nostrils and was liable to swoon. The connoisseur of camp sniffs the stink and prides himself on strong nerves, which is really interesting way to talk about it. I always am very interested in themes of boredom in art, or in art theory. And it's interesting that camp also has an interesting relationship with boredom. Camp usually only exists in societies where boredom is possible, where there's certain subgroups of society that can become taste connoisseurs, right? And also there's a part of the essay that talks about this relationship between camp and homosexuality, and how oftentimes the homosexual taste overlaps with camp taste a lot. But it's something that anybody could notice, right? Like, as I said about, for example, Cher, right? Who are the people who are more interested in the way that she runs her, you know, Twitter account or whatever? The gays, usually. Girls are also usually in that pool because there's a lot of exchange of cultural interests between the two groups, you know. It's oftentimes, you know, the good taste of the bad taste, that enjoyment of camp. And the thing is, when you like camp, it is about you actually liking it. It's not liking to laugh at it. You usually appreciate whatever it offers rather than you judge it. Camp doesn't moralize the fact that you could be serious about things, for example. It doesn't think that being serious is bad either. And as I've said, usually it's about failure, and it's about innocence, it's about naivete, about, this is direct quote from Sontag, what it does is to find the success in certain passionate failures. Camp taste is a kind of love for human nature. It relishes rather than judges the little triumphs and awkward intensities of character in quotation. Camp taste identifies with what it is enjoying. People who share this sensibility are not laughing at the thing they label as camp. They're enjoying it. Camp is a tender feeling. That's why oftentimes when people talk about something that's camp, they say it in a positive way. They don't say it as a criticism of the thing. Let me quickly tell you two examples that I think one is camp and the other one is not camp, of modern things, right? So first of all, let's talk about Riverdale. I know that a lot of the times there's a lot of conversation about how it is very campy. I think Cole Sprouse in one of the interviews straight up said that they know what they're offering. They know that this is a very campy show, whatever. They're offering this type of product, right? First of all, too self-aware, not camp. The entirety of the cast, I'm pretty sure the writers and the producers are also the same kind of, they have the same attitude, but let's say that it's just the actors, because that's what we actually saw with our own eyes, we heard with our own ears. The fact that the cast is not happy about being in that show. Oftentimes they criticize it quite harshly, or, you know, they don't have that love that you have to have for the project. Too much self-awareness of the fact that it is not good. Too much self-awareness to the fact that they're going overboard. Not enough glamour. And most of all, too much contempt of the actual creators, of the people who are participating in it, to the project itself. If they made the entirely the same product, but that product was really liked by the creators and by the artists, if you could see that they were very passionate about it, and they really thought that this was the best thing they could have made, and they were taking it very seriously, or at least very passionately they were approaching, you know, this project, then it would be more in the realm of camp. You would actually be able to say that it's camp without it being false. But in reality, Riverdale is not camp. It's not enough. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's something you can laugh at, but it doesn't quite go into the camp category because you don't watch it in the same way. Like, it's just a little bit too ridiculous, while at the same time not being liked by the creators to be camp. Now, on the other hand, this TikTok creator. I think that she probably started when it was still Musically or something. I'm not entirely sure, but Angel Mummy, Mummy, M-A-M-I. I feel like the way they pronounced it was like mummy, you know. That's not what I meant. She kind of made TikToks that had this like kind of high concept in terms of like the script that they were delivering, but it was terribly acted. However, everyone in these videos, they were very genuine about trying to do this thing. They were having fun, and they were doing something that they thought was good and had merit and was interesting or funny enough or interesting enough to be a thing. And that's why a lot of people started to like her as like a camp icon, because there's something sincere about this performance, and she's likable, and she has a very specific set of characteristics about her: what she wears, how she talks, her family situation, what she decides to talk about in her videos, the behavior that she exhibits, the way that she delivers her lines, because she's not delivering them deliberately in that way, it's just who she is. And then it becomes camp. At first, people were like, what the hell is this? This is bad. But now, in retrospect, people are like, there's something about this. This is camp. See, camp is very ephemeral, but it does have some things that you can just pin down long enough to decide whether something is camp or not. I feel like most of the time we just kind of go by feeling, but I think that going by feeling sometimes is not correct, because some people are just not sure how it's supposed to feel, and they start using, you know, parodies and stuff like that as an example of camp, and it just isn't. So I kind of wanted to show this two examples. And I think that, do you remember that, I think it was a TikTok of that woman who was in a dentist office, and then she gets up on the dentist chair when the dentist is out, or maybe it was like a doctor or something, and she starts dancing on it, and she's like filming herself, and the way that she's doing all of that and her sincerity of doing it is so camp. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's modern camp. Anyway, thank you for listening. This has been a very long explanation of what camp is. I hope I didn't bore you to death, and I hope that I cleared up some of the understanding of camp, or at least I have given you enough information that you are interested now to get into camp and get into this theory, or into this experience. Maybe it's gonna clear up why you like some things, you know, because sometimes you watch something and you're like, this is bad, but for some reason I'm enjoying this. Most of the time you're gonna figure out that you enjoy it because of its sincerity, genuinely, just because it has something, it creates something that's not moral. It's not morally bad or good, but it's also sincere, and sometimes it's endearing. Let me know what you think. I'm really curious to hear what you think about this, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.